Good morning, everyone. My name is Amy LeMay, and I've been working with Merdad and the team on this special project for the last couple of months. And on behalf of the CSPC, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Symposium on Canada's Innovation Strategy. We acknowledge that the Canadian Science Policy Conference is taking place on the unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, whose presence here reaches back to time immemorial. We respect our traditional hosts and thank them for allowing us to operate on this land. So before we start, just a couple of housekeeping notes. This year, CSPC is providing simultaneous translation and closed captions for all the panels in both English and French. You can scan the QR code on the banner to download the app and access subtitles in your preferred language. You'll use your own device and headphones to do that. There is also the conference mobile app. Feel free to download the CSPC 2024 app. It's available on the App Store and on Google Play, of course. Please remember to tweet about your favorite events and panels at the conference using @SciencePolicy and hashtag CSPC 2024. Finally, please remember to fill out the evaluation survey for each of the sessions this morning in the program app, or by scanning the QR code displayed on each session slide using the session number on the screen. Your feedback helps us improve the conference for next year. Enjoy the panel, the session, the symposium, everyone. And to get started, I'm going to introduce someone who needs no introduction, Merdad.
Bonjour, good morning, everyone. I am still thinking about the logistics, name badges, etc. So it takes me a few minutes to get into innovation policy, ecosystem, and mindset. So good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're hoping that this is a great start for the conference, the Symposium on Innovation Strategy in Canada. And let me tell you the story behind this symposium and the project on innovation strategy project in a way. This was based on the feedback we received from the community that there is a appetite and a strong feeling that the need for more conversation about the long-term strategy, Canada's strategy on innovation policy, and the shortcomings and how we can do better. We wanted to make sure that this project is mainly empowers the voice of private sector, especially, but also other thought leaders and experts in the field. So that's why we started this project about a couple of months ago with kind of three pillars. The first one was kind of editorials that are already published on the website. Please take a look at the digital version of the Innovation Policy magazine that you can find it on our website, and also it's in the app, I guess. Second part was the consultation sessions with a number of stakeholders, mainly private sector associations, industry associations from across different sectors and across the country. We did this over the month of October. The results of those consultations and summaries are again in the app and the page of the symposium. You can take a look. Hopefully some of you have read it before. And the third element of this project was this morning symposium on innovation strategy. So we wanted to present the results of those stakeholders' consultations, plus to hear your feedback, some panel discussions, and at the end, a few minutes, perhaps half an hour or less, for where to go from here. The future of innovation strategy project. What would you like us to do more on this topic over the course of next year and perhaps near future? That's the story behind this. So this could not have happened without the support of course, the sponsors of this symposium, as well as the volunteers and staff who worked on this, but especially the two individuals who really drove the content generation of this, Tatevik and Amy. I want to thank you for being part of this exciting project, and hopefully you remain working on this project in future. And also all the people who helped us to put this together, industry associations, the advisors of this project, and certainly some of our board members were directly working on this. That is it from me. I don't want to take more time from the thing. So without any further ado, we have placed a kind of an overview of innovation ecosystem that will be given by by two brilliant minds, Omar Kaya and Dave Waters. Dave is a member of the board of directors. Omar Kaya is the CEO of Global Advantages and who also helped us in this project. Please, Dave and Omar, come for your presentation. Thank you very much, everyone.
We have the slides up, please. Great, thank you so much. So it's an early morning start. Thank you all for being here at this time. And we would like to thank our colleagues at the Canadian Centre for Science Policy, organizers, sponsors, and everybody for being here. So we do have a short, high-level overview presentation of the Canadian innovation ecosystem. And this is extracted directly from our Ecosystem Explorer platform. And for those of you who may not know Global Advantage Consulting Group, we are an independent strategy and data analytics firm specialized in ecosystem analysis and mapping for supporting Canadian innovation-based economic growth. So this is building on the industry consultations that have been undertaken by the CSPC virtually. Dave and I both were participating in those and supporting that. And this is basically a summary that we put together about the key issues that were brought up by various sectoral industry associations and support organizations in our ecosystem. So really the purpose of our short presentation is to frame some of these key issues. It's not all the issues. There's certainly a lot to cover when we look at innovation ecosystem in Canada, and setting the stage up for a productive discussion as we look at developing a new strategy for Canada in the space of innovation. Just so you know, a copy of this deck is provided at our booth if you would like to get a copy of it. So sit back and relax and please enjoy the presentation. So, Dave.
Great, thank you very much, Omar. I'm very much aware of the fact that it's early in the morning and I still haven't quite digested my first cup of coffee. So if we have the next slide, please. Oh, I can do this? Oh, isn't this amazing? Isn't technology wonderful? Fantastic. I was wondering how to describe this slide so early in the morning. It's global R&D. So this is the representation of the amount of money that is spent, and it's in US dollars by all of the major countries in the world, and it's about $2.5 trillion. I think probably the best way to describe this is that this is a treasure map. As you know, the function of research is to produce new knowledge. So this is a map of the knowledge engine on a global basis. Who's producing new knowledge? And just to give you the title of it is Global R&D. To give you the definition from the Frascati Manual, research and experimental development, R&D, comprise creative and systemic work undertaken in order to increase the stock of knowledge. That's its purpose, increase the stock of knowledge, including knowledge of humankind, culture, and society. Just like to pause there, I had a very interesting discussion last evening with some friends who are engaged in social innovation. So just wanted to reinforce the definition in terms of what's included in terms of research and development, and to devise new applications available of knowledge. So this is the knowledge engine that we have on a global basis. The size of the bubble represents the amount of research and development work being done. And as you can see, Canada is there with a small little flag on in fact, it's on the left-hand side of this particular representation. It produces about 1.3% ballpark of the new knowledge that is being contributed on a worldwide basis. If you look at this as a race, though, so the question is, how close are we to the right-hand side of this graph? And you can see, wow, we got some big competitors out there that are much further advanced than we are. Israel leads the pack, the South Korea not too far behind. You have the United States, you have many of the European countries at that point, Nordic countries. And, ballpark, we're about 17th or 18th. So we haven't been doing very well in terms of this race producing new knowledge. And part of the issue then is, why is that? If you look at the vertical axis, that really shows you the number of researchers per million people. And Canada's fine. We're okay there. We're, 7th or 8th position, something like that. But it really is in terms of the production of new knowledge that one can make the argument we're under investing. But it also raises strategic issues. So the fact that we are so small in terms of this production of new knowledge raises the issue, well, what can we do about that? Can we try and understand better the new knowledge that is being created elsewhere? In other words, the 98.7% of new knowledge. But to do that, you need people who understand the nature of research and technology development and can understand what is relevant for Canada in terms of what's happening on a global basis. That's why recently I want to give a shout out to the U15. They're a member of a group that produced a Berlin statement this summer in which 166 research-intensive universities agreed to cooperate in terms of looking at the state of research and development and where they could cooperate. This is something that we should consider in Canada. Why don't we have an annual process to assess the state of research and development globally? Maybe the U15 coordinating with ISED to be able to do that, and bring that forward in the following way. You would share that knowledge among the academic institutions, both the universities and colleges. You then go to the 3 or 4 major business associations in terms of getting their views in terms of what seems to be happening on a global basis. You would go through the 13 science-based department and agencies in the federal government. And then maybe you have an annual briefing of cabinet to give them a sense of what is happening in the research and technology development space, and then what's relevant in terms of Canada. What should some of our priorities be? So this gives a bit of a different strategy that we may want to consider in terms of where our position is in terms of global R&D. Omer.
Great. So on the next slide, if we blow up the Canadian bubble that we just had a look at with Dave, this is basically the summary of the key actors involved in the Canadian research and development area. So there are basically 2 primary performers of R&D in Canada as we look at the StatsCan data, and they are the business sector at almost $29 billion or 59% of the R&D in Canada, and the higher education sector, universities and colleges there at $17 billion ballpark. There's a very recent update from StatsCan, so it's actually close to 18 right now as a sort of provision. So that's a nearly 35% of the R&D, and we have 6% by the government, so both federal and provincial governments combined from the performance of R&D perspective. And there are a series of funders of that as well. So one of the key points is to be able to enhance and link better the universities, colleges, the higher education sector, and the business sector. So this shows obviously the peer size of the bubbles. So there's a lot of research, new knowledge has been developed in both spaces, so that knowledge uptake and use could be strengthened by the 2 important research and development performer communities come closer to work together. This is already happening, obviously, but I think there's another increased perhaps look at that opportunity. The other point that I would like to make is that the researchers are obviously employed across the space, but when we think about the flow of the researchers that come from the ecosystem, 2/3 of them end up working for the business sector, so the private sector. Academic market is a little bit too tight. So we need to also make sure that the talent and the skills that come out of the system have industry relevant and demanded skills to be able to move that new knowledge, develop the technologies, and create the innovations that happen in the business sector. So I think this is 2 or 3 key points that I'd like to share on this slide.
Thank you, Omer. Thanks very much. On this slide, We have a schema that originally was called the Decade of Darkness. Unfortunately, it's now spreading over 2 decades. But what it maps is the average expenditure by OECD countries on research and development, and then tracks that against Canada's performance in red, the line below that. And of course, you can see how significantly the lines diverge. Against that lower line, you have the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 basic strategies that have been developed, which haven't moved the needle in terms of improving our performance on this particular measure. Now, it's not the only measure, but it's one of the standard ones that is used on a global basis. In going back to the first one you see there back in about 2001, Alan Rock and Jane Stewart, Canada's Innovation Strategy. I was actually involved in that as ADM in finance. One of my employees went over, Michael Fine, to help ISET in terms of developing that strategy. And then as I left and became a consultant, I did a little work trying to help my colleague on this, Michael. And there was a huge summit that led by Alan Rock and Jane Stewart. And I went in the following week and I said, well, you know, Michael, you must be expanding the number of staff you have to be able to implement all these terrific initiatives that the federal government announced. And he said, no, he said, I'm trying to find them all jobs. And I knew at that point that this was not going to work. We continually fail at implementation. So if you look at the divergence of those lines, we have aspirations that are really quite remarkable. We're all aware of them. We have an extraordinarily poor capacity to implement. And we need to, I think, reflect on that. This becomes more of a problem when you look at the gap. Global Advantage has done a great job in terms of identifying the nature of that gap. You know, $28+ billion annually, just if we wanted to become average in terms of OECD expenditures. I mean, that's a stunning gap. You know, could you imagine another, 6 to 8 billion, research being done in universities, in community colleges, being supported, private sector, and in government itself. So it's a stunning gap, but the issue is there's no conceivable way with a new government coming in that I can see any significant increase in federal support for R&D. In fact, I could see quite the opposite. The fiscal pressures are such that you can see a reduction. So the strategy of trying to fill that gap, I think, is one that we need to reflect on and really to think about. What it may mean, though, is trying to be smarter in terms of the way in which we link together to achieve our common objectives. So I think it's almost like a circling the wagons. We're going to have to be careful about the pressures, both from a new administration in the US, potential new administration in Canada, and try and work even more collectively to advance, I think, our common interest in a strengthened science, technology, and innovation ecosystem. Omer.
Thank you, Dave. So here we provide our overall assessment of Canada's R&D innovation. And this is basically a report card that we produce that incorporates a series of reputable indices to position Canada's performance. So we are looking at things like talent competitiveness, overall economic competitiveness, global innovation index, global innovation index inputs and outputs, and that conversion rate seems to be quite weak in Canada as well. And some of the R&D related mentions that we have covered already on the global scale and in the Canadian context. So R&D is a key metric, as we mentioned, but it's not the only one. And in addition to what we have assessed here, we are also lacking in some of the historical investments in machinery and equipment, which demonstrates embedded innovation. So that's one of the other aspects of innovation that we seem to be lacking. And the other one is on the intangibles and intellectual property. So also investments in that space by the business sector seems to be in a downward trend as well. There are new new initiatives. I think that's hopefully going to work out to reverse some of these trends. But we need to take a closer look at what they mean and how Canadian innovation can be supported through some of those investments as well. One of the other points that I wanted to emphasize is the importance of regulatory burden. And this is a point that's been made very well by Senator Colin Deacon. And when we think about some of our competitors globally, Europe is launching a simplification revolution. And this is quote unquote. And what we have seen from Senator Deacon's report is that Canada ranks only 35th out of 38th in the OECD in regulatory burden. So there's going to be an increase, I think, focused by some of the leading places like in the US as well. Under Donald Trump, they are expected to deregulate. So how does Canadian regulatory system respond in an agile way to ensure that the Canadian innovation can continue to spur? So the demand side measures in the whole space may need to be looked at more carefully and potentially also prioritized when we think about levers that the government has on procurement, on regulation, as we just mentioned. So how can these systems be more supportive of the Canadian small and medium-sized enterprises as well as the large businesses that obviously we really need in the economy? So Peter Nicholson actually delves into this issue of demand-side measures incredibly well. So basically, innovation is the only way to improve Canada's productivity. So it's really coming down to that conclusion. Series of reasons and economic arguments have been pushed forward by many. So we need innovation to solve the productivity problem, which is a national emergency, as you may have heard from the Deputy Governor of the Bank of Canada. So that's a standard of living related measure that we obviously would like to uphold in the Canadian economy and ensure that there is a high quality of life for Canadians. So that's based on an economic metric. Obviously, that doesn't all define what quality of life standards are established, but we know there's a generally positive correlation between that and happiness levels and whatnot. So innovation is an essential pillar for solving this major challenge, and we need to make sure that our ability to turn the great inputs and some of the supply side oriented measures can be complemented by, not necessarily replacing it, but complemented by more demand side measures, so the whole system from end to end can function better to produce the results that the Canadians need.
Thank you, Omar. It's quite a stunning report card when you see the metrics that are identified there. One of the issues this slide really is meant to convey is in order for a country to generate wealth, it has to trade. I mean, this is sort of the Michael Porter hypothesis in terms of looking at the traded capabilities that a country has. And it's through that mechanism and way in which you can then afford the array of social programs. So in looking at, well, how are we doing in terms of trade? and what are the prospects over the next number of years? The first issue here then is, well, who are you trading with? And here we see 77% of our merchandise trade is with the US. And then you'll notice that China at 4%. China actually used to be our second largest trading partner, but because of a variety of geopolitical events and so on, that has shrunk. But combining those two, that's 80% of our trade is with those two countries. And, to talk about an uncertain future in terms of that trading kind of relationship, I mean, we don't know whether, Donald Trump, a new administration, will be introducing the 10 or 20% tariffs. What kind of an impact does that have? He's certainly a very transactional leader. And when we look at 77% of our trade there, he'll be looking at wanting to make deals. So, what is going to be put up at risk here? Because in Canada, of course, that geographic split becomes obviously extremely important from our point of view. So it's a very uncertain future in terms of the trading relationship here. And I think that the additional element is when you go inside and look at the components of our trade, a lot of it is susceptible to the energy transition. So, oil and gas and related kind of products like that, automobiles and so on. Huge changes made in the industrial base right now. So that again just increases the risks for Canada in terms of having an economic viable country, and that's going to increase the financial pressures, I think, on all sectors of the economy, but including government. And so that's something we need to anticipate. Yep, Omer.
Thanks, Dave. We were given a little sign for timing, so I'm going to accelerate on this slide. So we do have a quick summary of our some of the research and innovation related performance problems that we have articulated based on our independent look. And one of the key points is on number one, we actually do not have an R&D goal in terms of investing a certain portion of our gross domestic product in this critical area of public policy. So when we think about Finland, for instance, they do have a target of 4% by 2030. The European Union has a 3% target. And they have actually just reiterated that at the recent Budapest Declaration on the new European competitiveness deal. This objective of achieving 3%. China is also aiming for over 3%. So countries are aggressively going after this area and investing through the key actors that we have shown, and making sure that this area can be ramped up, which is a critical element of innovation in an economy. On number three, we don't see any competitive industrial strategies, plans, metrics, or processes to manage some of those performance improvements that Canada needs. I think there's increased calls for industrial strategies that Canada needs. There are some elements of those, but they don't seem to be really major and competitive and integrated in terms of the composition of the economy that we should be considering. On number four, so we're looking at alignment between the various levers that the governments have, in particular in the area of R&D, the federal government. So spending measures, tax measures, regulations, procurement, and trade programs, how are they linked and integrated, and how are they aligned in terms of their objectives to achieve some of the outcomes that we have articulated in terms of both the economy, but also environmental and social related advancements. So innovation must be a whole of government priority, basically, aligning all the levers of spending and whatnot towards that direction. So on number five, we see a great issue of a great fragmentation. There are 130 plus programs for research and innovation, and this is federal government alone. There's been also some calls for rationalizing some of these programs and looking at them in a way that is measuring if they are achieving the intended outcomes from the design through to implementation. When we think about the US, we're giving some examples, but the Department of Government Efficiency to be run by Elon Musk, so that is going to probably have a similar type of direction. And finally, the point that we want to make, and this is going to be our last slide, is one of the solutions that we propose to this problem is the creation. It actually exists, but I think ramping up in a way of a new unifying structure and a unifying process to bring all the stakeholders together on an aligned vision in the context of an innovation strategy.
Thank you, Omer. This is our last slide, and just building on what Omer just summarized. Right now, I'm tracking 26 initiatives, mostly Canadian, in terms of groups that want to change the STI ecosystem. You've got, Mark Carney in terms of the group he has in terms of a new economic plan. There are several internal government initiatives. We have a new competition policy. We have one of our key senators coming out with issues. Of course, the Council of Canadian Academies has a major study ongoing. ITIF, the Canadian version of it, has 2 or 3 suggestions. The Council of Chief Executives has a complete plan. There are many, many plans out there. So again, they're fragmented. They're all right and they're all wrong. The issue is how do we try and integrate together the kind of changes that we think are needed in terms of the STI ecosystem. And as Omer has identified, this suggests one kind of mechanism that might be able to do that. So looking at industrial policy, linking it to trade strategy, linking it to the R&D innovation strategy, and absolutely linking it to a skills strategy. You need to do all of these things together. In our view, one of the fascinating things were the strategy tables that the government had developed. And then we had a remarkable Canadian, Monique Leroux, who then put an umbrella organization all over those strategy tables. So you looked at all of these issues collectively and together. The issue, though, is you need to make these strategy tables permanent. The speed at which change is going to be required is such that it cannot be done, oh, gee, we haven't done a biotech strategy in 5 years. Why don't we get together and do that? And, oh, gee, on AI, we really forgot about the ethical implications. Maybe we'll create a new organization, to look at that. You need to have these structures permanently, and that means for the government sacrificing a little bit of control and giving it over to public, academic community, but in particular, in my view, the business community in terms of trying to move forward. So you have integrated approaches to spending, tax, regulatory, trade kind of issues, skills development as the structure that leads you forward. So that's the general conclusion we have. We don't know if that's a model that will, we think it's a model that could work. We don't know whether it's the model, but it gives some of the principles that are at play in terms of trying to improve the performance of our system. The final element is don't leave it up to government. It is not possible for government to come and solve these particular solutions. And so this is a bit of a call to action for all of the people, many of the people obviously in this room. We've got to take and seize the initiative ourselves to try and develop these new structures. So, yeah, thank you.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, David Homer. I'm going to hold on to questions until after Tadevik and I do our presentation, because both presentations are going to be very similar, and I think they'll raise similar feedback and questions. So we're going to go ahead with the next slides. Great, thank you. So as Mehrdad mentioned, this innovation strategy project included a series of consultation sessions over the last couple of months. And it involved looking at 3 key topics in each session, which included emerging trends and challenges that are critical to the sectors, how we could develop an innovation strategy to address these challenges, and what the priorities were for an innovation strategy. We included 5 different sectors in the sector consultations: advanced manufacturing, agriculture and agri-food, health and biosciences, digital and high tech, and natural resources. We ended up doing 3 consultation sessions, one for agriculture and agri-food, one that combined advanced manufacturing and natural resources, and one that combined health, biosciences, digital and high tech industries. And we're going to present the results, or the summaries of each of those consultation sessions, as well as what we call a cross-sector synthesis to look at the commonalities that emerged from those consultation sessions. The reports for each of these are in the app. You can download the report for each consultation session as well as the cross-sector synthesis. And I'm going to hand it over to Tadevik now to take us through.
Hi, so the first series of consultation was in agriculture and agri-food. And what the consultation highlighted were the first of in the main emerging trends. They were sustainable practices. I will go very quickly because the reports are already there, and we will give more time for discussion of recommendation and cross-sector analysis. Plant-based protein, gene editing, and precise farming, that was also identified as the main trend. Carbon reduction and sustainability. In terms of the challenges in agriculture and agri-food was again mentioned, as we heard from the previous presentation, regulatory burden, economic pressure. So it's very costly to do an innovation, especially for farmers in small and medium-sized enterprises. Another thing was mentioned is that Canada is struggling with the implementation of innovation policies. Important aspect was mentioned as a challenge, access to capital and scale-up infrastructure. In terms of the strategy elements, was identified as sector-specific and regional approaches, given that Canada has a diverse regional specifications, so it reflects on agriculture, and the policies need to be addressing those diversities. Private sector leadership was also identified as an important element. Better coordination between the stakeholders, clear division of the role. So it was mentioned that private sector should have taken more responsibilities on commercialization and public sector more on into the research. Accountability and project management. It was identified that there was many good policies. However, accountability and management, they were the ones that make it more challenging. Another important element was mentioned gaps, de-risking the innovation for farmers. This is an important, and data-driven decision-making frameworks are also important. In terms of the priorities, was highlighted strengthening public-private partnership. As we can see, this is repetitive in all across the sectors. Innovation-driven regulatory frameworks, again, was mentioned that some of the regulations are actually hindering the innovation-driven applications. Investment in critical infrastructure, supporting SMEs and startup. And another important aspect was a long-term vision that would position Canada as a global leader in agriculture and innovation. In terms of recommendation, regulatory modernization, sector-specific strategies, tailored strategies to need that address the needs in different agricultural sectors and region. So one size fit wouldn't match. Public-private collaboration, again, as I mentioned, they were looking more that public should have taken responsibilities for the research and private sector on the commercialization efforts. Accountability in the project management and support for SMEs and farmers. So provided targeted support to SMEs and farmers through access to capital, infrastructure, and risk mitigation tools. So the second series of consultation, we combined two sectors, which is advanced manufacturing and natural resources. It was identified as, again, the trends were identified, labor market shortages, regulatory and policy challenges, as we can see, again, it was identified, and inadequate domestic supply chain capacity, sustainability challenges. As so there is a challenge for them to address sustainability at the same time keeping the global competitiveness for Canada. In terms of the strategy elements, was identify strategic workforce and skills development issues, collaborative and adaptive policy frameworks, industry-driven innovation ecosystem, domestic supply chain capacity. For priorities, it was mentioned that it's important that we address in terms of the innovation as an innovation strategy component, investment in capital and scaling up, regulatory reforms, labor market and training initiative, sector-based strategy, and improved government industry collaborations. For the recommendations, development of the workforce strategy aligned with sector needs. Align regulatory framework, enhance industry-academic partnership for commercialization, prioritize industry-led partnership to close the gap between research and commercialization, adopt flexible outcome-focused innovation goals, and revitalize sector-based strategies and collaborations. So the last consultation sessions that we did, it was again a combination of the health, bioscience sectors and digital and high-tech sectors. The trends that identified, it was also interesting, there was a shift in research prioritization. It was identified that in health research funding, it's increasingly moving towards short-term and government prioritized project. And it is mentioned that it's supposed to be more a discovery-based research. And we will benefit more addressing also investigator-driven and discovery research. Another challenge or trend was identified as data accessibility in digital health. AI and digital technologies particularly cybersecurity, AI, and big data are seen as a key trends. In terms of gaps, capital and talent gaps, capture and scaling constraints, commercialization and adoption gaps, as we can see, it's kind of repetitive for all over the sectors. And in terms of priorities, alignment across government and private sector, and also better collaboration among all the stakeholders or multi-actor collaboration in the context of the innovation ecosystem, human-centered, mission-driven design, and fostering AI and open access. I will jump into the recommendations. So sectoral challenges, health sector challenges are limited data accessibility, funding gaps for clinical trials, talent shortages, and the needs for patient-centric innovation. In digital sectors, concern focus on cybersecurity, AI, venture capital shortages, and risk-aware mindset in Canadian private sector. For commercialization and regulatory needs, the recommendation was that in biotechnology and life sciences sector, they face challenges in scaling and commercialization innovation. So having better regulatory framework should foster those challenges and make it more globally competitive. For infrastructure and human resources gap, a key barrier is the shortage of infrastructure and skilled human capital. Investment in infrastructure should foster those challenges. And another aspect was mentioned that integration of digital skills into the workforce should be a good solution to have highly specialized talent pool. I will take over to.
So when we put all that together and we do our cross-sector synthesis, it's not going to come as a surprise. I think you've seen the common and recurring themes that Tadevik just went through, but I'll just sort of bring them together into a collective final summary. So in terms of, and for the sake of time, I'm just going to cover the emerging trends on this slide and then get into the recommendations, and then we can open it up for questions and discussion. So cross sectors, all sectors identified labor and talent shortages, particularly in skilled trades, technical roles, and specialized fields, consistently identified as a barrier to innovation. Each sector identified the need for talent and skills development, retention, and attraction, as well as specialized training programs that match evolving industry needs. And of course, there were nuances across the sectors. For example, in the advanced manufacturing and natural resources, there was a real urgent need for apprenticeships and skilled trades. On the regulatory burdens, again, it doesn't come as a surprise. Dave and Omer identified regulatory issues as a key problem in Canadian innovation. Lack of clarity and consistency with regulatory frameworks are causing delays in approvals, which impacts domestic and foreign investment and does threaten competitiveness. Again, capital and scaling constraints across all the sectors were very evident. Venture capital, lack of venture capital, high tax rates, funding gaps are issues that are definitely affecting SMEs and startups. Infrastructure gaps. All the sectors identified some form of physical infrastructure as an issue around innovation. Agriculture identified digital connectivity. Health sciences are looking for more wet lab and production facilities. And advanced manufacturing is a shortage of pilot and scale-up manufacturing processes. These gaps definitely hinder the ability to conduct R&D, commercialize innovations, and expand operations globally, or domestically, sorry. Environmental sustainability and climate adaptation. There was a strong evidence on sustainability across all the sectors. Participants noted that industry sectors are fully committed to meeting sustainability targets, emission targets, but they need practical, environmentally viable strategies that balance environmental policy imperatives with realities of competing in a global marketplace. A number of the sectors identified that because of Canadian regulations, sustainability goals, Canadian companies are often at a global disadvantage to other countries who don't have maybe as rigorous sustainability goals as we do. Finally, on the emerging trends, policy misalignment and lack of coordination consistently across the sectors, conflicting goals across all levels of government, inadequate oversight, follow through and implementation of policies are key challenges across the sectors. And so moving now to the recommendations coming from those, that sector analysis or cross-sector analysis. So we're definitely looking for a coordinated workforce strategy that focuses on apprenticeships, digital literacy, and specialized training for evolving needs, technological needs across the sectors. Tailored programs are definitely needed. Each sector has its own specific needs, but definitely labor shortages are impacting all of them. In terms of regulatory reforms to support innovation, sectors are looking for innovation-friendly regulatory processes that reduce approval time, simplify compliance, and enhance transparency, and some regulatory adaptability. One suggestion is the use of regulatory sandboxes where new technologies can be piloted in controlled environments prior to environmental or regulatory approvals. We need to ensure policy alignment, transparency, and accountability. Policy needs to be aligned with industry needs. We need accountability structures in terms of implementation and managing implementation of policies. And going back to the sector tables that Dave mentioned, there were some recommendations from the consultation sessions about reviving these sector tables. Investment in critical infrastructure, again, we need to prioritize some investment in infrastructure, including digital infrastructure and physical infrastructure across the sectors. We need support for SMEs and startups so that they can scale domestically. One issue that was raised was that a lot of times when a Canadian company gets to a certain size, it struggles to grow domestically and ends up going elsewhere out of the country to expand. Strengthening public-private partnerships. This includes industry, government, and academia in order to drive commercialization and do that whole entire innovation life cycle. There was a lot of, across the sectors, we saw recommendations for industry-led innovation hubs that would allow research to be translated into tangible market benefits and economic growth within the country. We need sector-based strategies and regional customization. Again, there was a lot of nuances, even though there's a lot of commonality across these sectors, there are nuances. Each of the sectors are facing their own nuanced challenges. And because of our geographic diversity, there are regional differences that need to be addressed in an innovation strategy. And finally, an innovation strategy should be aligned with climate and sustainability goals that meet the needs and allow Canadian companies to stay competitive. And with that, I will open it up to questions and discussion and feedback. What we're looking for here is your thoughts on both the presentation from Dave and Omar and the presentation on the consultation sessions, any questions that you may have. And do we have a mobile mic in the room for questions? Yeah, up front, right. I think we've got a mic coming, yeah. So should I just project? Go ahead. All right.
So I'm a philosopher by training, which makes me, a troublemaker, and I always ask those questions that are difficult, and I don't intend to put you on the spot. Okay, so I will start with I'm a troublemaker. I'm a philosopher by training. I've been thinking about innovation strategy, however, for the last 5 years. It's like my new career. And I'm going to ask a question. I don't intend to put you on the spot or anything because I love the fact that CSPC has been leading these consultations. But we've been leading similar consultation in the space of social innovation. And I mean, how do I put this? So everything that you say makes sense for industrial strategy. So there's two things I want to say. So this is industrial strategy, but of course an innovation strategy is about more than an industrial strategy. We need to be able to have innovation, across the board and research contributes to all sorts of innovation, much beyond innovation strategy. When we're thinking about innovation strategy, we can think about the research that goes towards that, and then the need of industry in terms of actually creating the wealth and being able to trade. So when we think about the consultations that you've led, so you have been asking leaders in industry what they think the challenges are. I've been doing the same thing. But as a researcher, as someone whose job it is to think about innovation strategy, I don't take what they tell me for cash, right? So if they tell me we have needs, that's part of the evidence that we need to understand what's going on, because it's an important part of the puzzle, especially when we're thinking about big systems level transformation like the one that you're proposing, just in the industrial sector. So I'm wondering, it's like what I'm hearing is stuff that we've known for a while, like it's been vastly documented by all sorts of people, and there have been solutions that have been proposed across the board. In Europe, they're doing innovation strategy very differently. In Germany, for instance, their entire science and innovation strategy integrates both aspects of industrial strategy and social innovation, because they're using models for tackling the kind of complexity that we're facing in understandings of emergence. So I'm just thinking, so I hear this, what I see is people telling us what we already know, so we can understand that they understand what the problem is. But to go from there to saying, and we should actually recommend what they're saying, I think there's a step that's missing there. That's just like taking a step back and say, okay, but what's the evidence we have? We understand, and this is sort of also at the core of an innovation strategy. You need to understand what your stakeholders believe and want in order to be able to shape policies that are going to make sense. But you can't just say, they say this, therefore we're going to give it to them. Because there are elements of of the report, of the recommendations, that sort of go against the evidence that we have about what kind of things work when it comes to adopting, for instance, mission-oriented innovation strategy. And so I see all sorts of like things that we already know, but also things that we already know and doesn't work. So I'm sorry, I'm throwing that at you. I feel like it needs to be done.
No, I think you're telling the room, because that's the point of this part of the symposium. I wonder if Dave and Omar want to comment on that, or if anybody else wants to comment. I don't take it as a personal response at all. So I think this is the kind of dialogue that we're trying to elicit with this initiative.
Am I on? Yeah? No? Is it? Yep. Great. No, I think, to me, Sandra has raised an excellent question. The context here was actually to go out and get the views of industry and to try and capture them. And I think that, that's been done very well. The challenge, obviously, you can see is in terms of the fragmentation of the issues that are of concern. So how do you integrate that? The larger question, though, is business integration for what purpose? And to me, the answer to that has to be to meet the needs of citizens. So going back to even the question of what research should be supported by government, in my own view, to me, government is the challenge. Because the real question isn't that, it really should be, what new knowledge do Canadians need in order to meet their needs on a daily basis? That's question one. Then question two is, well, how do we access that new knowledge, develop it, integrate it with the knowledge we have, and make it available to citizens to meet their needs, to the private sector in terms of their industrial objectives, academic sector in terms of additional research, and government in terms of its regulatory function, which to me is constantly ignored. and needs to be really revised. So I agree very much with that, the issue reflecting. I think here, though, was looking at, so what is the industry kind of saying us? The bigger question, though, is for what purpose? And that gets you directly into meeting the needs of citizens.
Any other, right here? Oh, okay.
I
Go
have
ahead.
one. Hi. My name is Marc Nantel. I'm the Vice President of Research at Niagara College. And what I got most out of Omer and David's presentation is that the 2 decades of darkness in funding started when David left the federal government. So you should have stayed. But I noticed that although our national R&D is lacking behind, the BIRD, business expenditure and research and innovation compared to the OECD, is also 50% lower. The government research expenditures for government research is down 57%. But Canada's investment in higher education research and development is 40% above the OECD average. So that's kind of interesting, given that the report card we saw was terrible. So I guess my question, which I admit is a leading one, David and Amy, who both know the college system, is like, what could college applied research do to help with the problem? I've seen on one of your slides, essentially more technology absorption instead of invention. Don't want to make enemies in the room, but how could colleges come in and be that complementary part more than it is now?
Yeah, great. Go ahead.
Sure. My name's Matt Price Gallagher, and I'll just give it context so you can see where I'm coming from in terms of my comments. So I've been running a quantum AI nano deep tech company, privately funded in Montreal, for 25 years. After the first 5 years, to the point that was just made, we moved to Israel all our R&D because of the problem at the universities, because it's very cross-disciplinary. Our technology and where technology is going. So my 2 comments are, one, when we look at BIRD or we look at the lack of early stage and pre-seed stage is really, really critical for deep tech, and that's where we're going. We have that gap. We have these indicators, but what is, those are symptoms. What's the problem? What's the underlying problem? And from my experience, I think it's connectivity and it's collaboration. Now in Israel and Silicon Valley, they don't have a proximity issue. I mean, they're all, right there. And then, and I know in Israel, there's like one coffee shop in Tel Aviv they go to and everyone talks, like all the stakeholders. And innovation has a broad stakeholder canvas. It's not a linear ecosystem. But we have now the emergence of platform business model. And Canada, in fact, is one of in terms of the constructors of that with CGI. And of course, it's an AI algorithm that does all the matching with Mila, AMI, and Vector. We have those skills to build a national platform, innovation platform. And to Dave and Omar's point, I think we have to have one strategy for one country, And when you look at where the technology is going, I think Dave, you brought it up, like, okay, on the map, where do we fit in terms of our R&D innovation skill sets? Let's take away the back end of translation. Where do we fit in the research side? Where are we really strong at? Well, we're really strong at AI and quantum. We were leaders in AI, in quantum in AI, until we dropped the ball on the translation side. Elon Musk raised $8 billion in 1 week for a company. That's more than we put in, AI collectively. So, in my opinion, AI and quantum, they're kissing cousins. Quantum AI-assisted simulation in the first phase of flattening R&D, and then actually in the implementation or in terms of application, they're all going to involve that. So we have that skill set. When we have a short period of time to bring these 2 clusters together, and then in terms of the areas that we should focus on, climate tech and digital tech. Climate tech underneath it brings clean energy and agri-tech. So these are just thoughts that, I've had we've had as an organization. We are trying to put together this strategy with groups and a public-private partnership. So, I put that out there for people to think about. And then if anyone wants to talk more about that, we're 2 years into putting this together. So, but I think this is what needs to be done.
Thank you. Where's the mic? Right over there? And where's the next? Right there. Okay. We've got about another, we can take another 10 minutes of conversation and discussion. We got started a little bit late, so I'm gonna, so go ahead. Who has the mic?
Is this on? Okay.
Yeah.
Walker here at the Institute for Collaborative Innovation, and I want to pull a bit more on the thread on regulatory burden. I grew up as a government scientist. I cut my teeth on the precautionary principle. And I would expect that for many of our scientists in the room today, that's been the case as well. To David's comment, one of the core roles of governments is to protect their citizens. Safety and security are paramount. And the key instrument that governments have for doing that is regulation. And a key input to regulation is science advice. There could be an argument made that in Canada, our precautionary principle has become a no-risk principle. However, to change the paradigm to a better balance in a risk equation requires a conversation with citizens. It needs the agreement of citizens. It can't be industry saying, government change the risk profile so that we can create more wealth if in fact more Canadians are harmed. So I would argue that part of, and to your comment, Sandra, I believe this is part of social innovation because we need new conversations and frankly our science community, particularly in the government labs and in academia, have a need and a role to engage citizens in recalibrating that balance. We can't throw away the precautionary principle, but surely we can get it into a better risk balance, and it requires the trust and confidence of citizens. The pandemic, the public health response to the pandemic was an exercise in the precautionary principle, and we didn't get it right. We ended up damaging a whole lot of things that we thought were well-intentioned, but ended up creating risks in spaces that we hadn't anticipated. We have to do better. Let's have the conversations.
Thank you. Who's got the mic now? Right over there. Okay.
Yes, Dan Wayner, retired now, but formerly NRC. So I find it interesting that whenever we talk about innovation, we tend to approach it from the STI direction, as if there's some causal link between doing science and doing innovation. And I'll just pick on one thing, and that is, I read the reports and I listened to these comments, and my maybe slightly critical analysis is it still feels like Canadian companies saying, I'd like to risk somebody else's money in order to be successful. And an example is I don't understand if there are barriers to companies reinvesting in technology to improve their productivity. And yet I don't see a lot of evidence, and maybe I would have liked to have been in some of these conversations, I guess, because I don't know if the companies are coming and saying, I'm not able to invest in my own future because of science policy or because of some other reason, or it's because I'm not willing to take the risk unless you give it to me. And so I know it's kind of a critical comment, but I'd like to respond to my friend here from Niagara College. I forgot your name, sorry. And that is, if we cannot get our companies in Canada to invest capital in technology, how do we expect them to understand the importance of doing research to invent new technology? And so one way around that, where we could involve our colleges and to maybe some extent our universities and government labs, is creating technology adoption centers where, in fact, rather than inventing new technologies, have places where off-the-shelf technologies can be set up, companies go in, and they can de-risk in their investment by having a place, a sandbox to play with new technologies, to learn how to customize them, to learn whether or not they're appropriate for their needs. So I just wanted to kind of say that I would like us to be talking more about the innovation side looking back rather than the science and research side looking forward. And I think that's one of the ways that we can change how we think about innovation in Canada.
Great. Those are great suggestions. Where's the next mic? Right over here. Okay.
Good morning. Rory Francis, CEO of the Prince Edward Island Bio Alliance. We're a cluster of 60 companies in the biotech sector in our province, now the second largest industry in PEI. So lots to think about here in this conversation. First of all, come back to some of David's slides there for a moment. When you look at that path of 8 or 9 different initiatives that have been taken to try to define an innovation strategy for Canada and so on, a couple of common factors among them all. First of all, they were all government-led. Secondly, they're all top-down. And I would suggest those are recipes for failure right off the top. Yet we keep doing those things. The other point, I'm just going to be unpopular for the day here, so get used to it, I guess. The other point is that there's a kind of a sense of, well, if we just put more money into the R end of things, then everything would be fine. World would be just hunky-dory. Why would we put more money into a system that does not work? And it's not working. The evidence is pretty clear that it's not working. We're not getting the return on investment now. So how do we convince the next government that it's a good idea to invest more on the R end of things? I'll just keep the D out of it because that's different. When the output side of things in terms of economic impact from our R&D investments by industry as well as anybody else is underperforming. So that's point 2, I guess. The other point I wanted to make is that we have probably not nearly enough industry leadership in the room to really have this conversation. And the industry end of the spectrum, if we're talking about innovation, sorry, but the commercialization, my definition, the commercialization of the R&D is an essential element. Otherwise, we're not really talking about innovation. We're talking about invention, we're talking about something else. So we've done a job on the term innovation over time. And if we're really talking about commercialization and economic impact, then we need to have industry leadership in the room. So this is a systems problem. Again, I would argue that this should be a bottom-up conversation. Several things have been said, I think, that are absolutely bang on, and that is that we have failed to think about. We're still making commentary just a few minutes ago about the industry in Canada, and you just can't do that. There are so many sectors where the investment of R&D and the outcomes from those investments by governments, by industry, are doing really, really well. And then there's other sectors that are doing terribly. So we can't lump all this stuff. We're not going to solve this by lumping everything and kind of generalizing and averaging and so on. And I appreciate the work the roundtables have done. I was part of one. But we're lumping things all the time, and we cannot get down to the granular what's wrong, where are the opportunities, how do we fix these things when we keep lumping everything. So that's bottom up, regional. If we think the provinces, the regional development agencies don't have a significant influence on the translation of R&D to businesses that could be successful, we're absolutely wrong. It's not all happening out of Ottawa, sorry. So those entities have to be involved. We just do not have right now a wind up here, but the facilitating structures, Richard Bendis would call them innovation intermediaries, that are necessary to build the relationships among business leadership, businesses, academic and research partners, government partners, investors. They all need to be at that table. Single strategies, probably regional, not national. Yes, eventually there are some things that are going to bubble up to the top in terms of policy, et cetera, that make sense to be delivered nationally. But lots of them aren't, and they need to be supported regionally, much closer to the ground where people actually know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a mic over here, and then we've got one right here. Okay, go ahead.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Gordon McBain. I'm a professor of University of Western Ontario. I just wanted to bring up the issue that was mentioned by one of the speakers in what I've been listening to so far, is the issue of the changing climate system. If we look at the World Economic Forum's Global Risk Report, and they put them out every year, but the one for 2024 lists the number one event that is risking all of the things around the world over 10 years and beyond. Well, actually the number 1, 2, 3, 4 are all related to environment and climate change issues. And we have a changing set of risks. We have, quite frankly, also a changing set of opportunities where Canadian industry, Canadian agriculture, food, and all kinds of other sectors can take advantage of this by better, let's say, looking into the opportunities scientifically and economically, societally. And I'd just like to say is there are some opportunities there that we should be looking at across different sectors. And I just note that since I talked about the global risk assessment, one of the number one risk over the next few years, according to them, the next two, they say, is misinformation and disinformation. And what we're still seeing after decades of science on climate change, and I've been working, well, believe it or not, I've been working on climate change science since the 1970s, and I've been leading international programs since the 1980s on climate change. We know a lot about it, but we need to find better ways of using that information, working with private sector, provincial, federal governments to better come up with strategies and policies that will adapt to and take, well, where there are benefits and opportunities to take advantage of those and work on it. So I'll just stop talking there and say that the other, I just want to mention, they also mentioned cybersecurity and these kind of issues. So looking at these kind of risks across sectors is also very important. And climate change, I think, is something that we need to work on together. And I'll be around the rest of the week and chat with you. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Oh, we've got one here. We can take one more question after that. We've got about 3 minutes left before we need to go to the break. Go ahead.
I will try then to be succinct and leave room for other people to speak. There's a lot of great conversation in this room. I'm Dana McCauley. I am the CEO of the Canadian Food Innovation Network. In that capacity, I represent over 5,600 people working in food innovation. So, Rory, hopefully I can speak a little bit to the industry perspective. Change is really rapid in this economy due to a million factors, but technology being a huge one of them. And we have an economy that is mostly made up of SMEs. So what I would love to ask you, Amy, and your colleague, is how many SMEs you spoke to during the consultations, because I think the answers you get from large companies which have innovation departments who seek out new technologies and are looking at continuous improvement are quite different from what the SMEs would say. In the food sector, we've got about 7,300 SMEs, and most of them are S's. They have less than 10 employees. The person who's running that company wears a lot of hats, and they are just trying often to make payroll. Their margins are razor thin. We do not have a startup problem in Canada. We're great at starting companies. We're great at even starting academic-led companies. But where the appetite for investment for corporations falls short is in that SME tier, I believe. And they need, and I love the sandbox idea, because they really need an opportunity to be led to the buffet of technologies, to try them, get their confidence up, find that adopting those technologies isn't as hard and as messy as they maybe feared it would be, and that it does unlock competitiveness through productivity gains and margin gains for them. That may not be true for all sectors, but in the food sector, I think this is a really big opportunity. And I think any strategy that is going to take discovery research through the TRL levels needs to really focus quite heavily on the absolute unique needs of SMEs.
Thanks, Dana. Just to clarify, the consultation sessions that we did were with industry associations and commodity organizations in the case of agriculture and agri-food. So yeah. Was there a mic over here? Yeah, this is our last question. We've actually gone a little bit over, but we'll do this last question, then we'll break. Just to note, we'll have the panel session after the break, but then we also have a half hour left to do this kind of thing. So hold your questions, hold your comments, hold your ideas, because we'll give you another half hour at the end of the symposium. Go ahead.
Thanks a lot. So the question, I'll keep it brief, but and maybe we can pick up the conversation afterwards, David. But I had a question about the slide there with the 8 strategic plans. Each one of them becomes more and more targeted investment and goes deeper and deeper into application and the commercialization side. Are we just hitting the wrong targets in each of those strategies as we're continuing down that pipeline to get us that larger gap? Or is it because we haven't done the foundational investments that would give us the fruit 10 to 20 years down the road to be able to realize more of the commercialization and have more investment from the R&D group? Have we picked the tree dry in terms of the lowest hanging fruit, I guess is the question.
Great. Thank you. So we're going to take a 25-minute break. We're going to be back here at 9:45. And as I mentioned, we'll have a panel session with 6 people who will provide some feedback and ideas about what's been presented so far this morning, and then a half-hour next step session to end the symposium. Thanks, everyone. Back at 9:45.